I think at this point we will just kick off the panel discussion. I think I can see there's a couple of questions in the Q&A to start with. Simon Doherty from Queen's like to know, how do we improve inter and transdisciplinary understanding and collaboration in peacetime? Everyone is so busy all the time. You hit a pandemic and questions then start becoming asked. Vet labs are ISO 17025 accredited. Vets know about coronavirus. Don't get me wrong, we're in a much better place than ever 5 to 10 years before. So yeah, I think Simon's question's a very good one there. Because I'm in charge of veterinary lab testing labs as well as research labs at AFBI, we had to rapidly turn over to COVID testing in one of the labs because we have the same equivalent accreditation as the medical labs. So this is why a lot of the veterinary establishments like APHA as well were able to jump into that role, whereas the universities didn't have that same level of skill and had to have the training on board. So all these things have to be taken into place. So I think Simon's saying, how do we bring all these strands together quickly, and it's not just the knee-jerk response? How do we do this in peacetime? So I'm not sure who would like to answer that, but take that one up.
Shall I have a go?
Yes, please do, yeah.
Yes, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more, Simon, and this is definitely an area where we need to promote more about what the animal health and environmental health colleagues can do, because it was shocking when COVID started that nobody came to ask how to manage a big outbreak when vets have done it in 2001. And that was a real shame. I thought that was, and in fact, we did spend a lot of time telling the other government departments about it. So we're getting better. And actually it links quite nicely into Jane's question, which is the next one about identifying those roles and responsibilities and the links in. And we have got better at that now in the last year or so in government, certainly, to finally sit down. And a lot of it is, we've got something called the Biological Security Review and Strategy Review, sorry. And that does finally actually bring out that you need to have a central point in Cabinet Office or somewhere like that, where they've got those networks and they know who to go and speak to and have those people laid out. And in terms of sorry, I'm jumping to the next question a little bit, but the guidance, there's some good guidance about how to do that in the tripartite joint risk assessment for One Health, where they lay out there what sort of levels of people you should have talking to one another.
Yeah, that question, because I know the audience possibly can't see it, which Helen has answered there. It was from Jane Gibbons on, has anyone created a guidance pack to show the posts and processes that need to exist within organisations to enable cross-sector or cross-department working on One Health? I think this would be critical to success. So Helen was addressing that question. We've another question here. Why was coronavirus not on the priority list for the next pandemic? Well, that's a very good question, because we already had SARS-1, which it didn't spread, so it was not nearly as lethal as obviously SARS-2. So we knew coronaviruses were out there. Virologists knew that coronaviruses mutate a lot. So probably there should have been more emphasis. I think the one people were expecting to come along was avian influenza, and one that jumped into humans. And I think that's the one which was expected. And obviously we're still holding our breath on that one. We're having a major avian flu in birds and poultry at the minute throughout Europe, including ourselves. And this is one of the ones that we test for, as does APHA. So the coronaviruses are very much now on the agenda, obviously. I'm on the board of the newly formed UK International Coronavirus Network, and we're having many international conferences around the world now to look at all coronaviruses, because we don't think they're finished. Obviously, there may be other threats coming out there, and just to flag up, I'm leading organisation of a coronavirus on the veterinary coronaviruses and wildlife coronaviruses in Belfast next year. But a very good question, Pam. I mean, obviously, a lot of people are concerned with viruses coming out of bats as well, and those are targets. So, I mean, I think there's so many targets that we need to worry about, but it's a bit difficult to predict what's going to jump next. So, so we really need to have an overall surveillance program on that. If anybody else wants to jump in on that one too, please do so.
So I think coronaviruses were on the list, but they hadn't been put through the full rigor of doing a reasonable worst case scenario as avian influenza had, because that one, it was more likely to happen, and we had more tools in the toolbox for avian influenza with the vaccines, and there therefore been much more of a focus on that over the years. And as you say, coronaviruses, we have a lot of them, and they don't become pandemic, and I think we still don't necessarily understand why this one became so pathogenic and mutated so quickly in comparison to other coronaviruses. But lessons learned, certainly.
Yeah, indeed, yeah. I'll move on to the next question, which is anonymous here. Are there any examples of where environmental and veterinary researchers, for example, work alongside one another with shared outcomes and learning? Right, well, I can start on that one. Environmental, obviously one of the things that we do now to monitor viruses is look in the environment, and this is being taken for coronavirus monitoring now, rather than test the population, you can look for the viruses in water supplies. So that's certainly one very where environmentalists are working very strongly with veterinary people and virologists. And as you may be aware, that polio was picked up in water supply in England, but it's probably a reverted vaccine. So that's certainly one example, but there are many others where people are looking at wildlife populations when they're disturbed, again, which I think, coming back to Wendy's talk, deforestation, etc., has allowed animals to come out into areas they wouldn't normally. I don't know whether you want to say anything about that, Wendy. Maybe.
Oh, yeah, sorry, thank you. Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely agreed. And I think it sort of underlines that need for the comprehensive surveillance systems that you've mentioned, and really making sure that the data coming out of the veterinary sector, and also the wildlife and sort of conservation sector as well, which, as we've seen in that particular situation, is really important. Yeah, and how that data, again, back to Helen's point around the kind of operability between the different systems, even where those systems are in place, having them being able to have that appropriate crosstalk and the collation. I think there's sort of some really exciting opportunities, with sort of big data and AI, and also the kind of accessibility, of mobile technologies to allow that data to be fed into, central repositories. But obviously the kind of governance, the sort of the digital governance around that, I think also, provides some challenges.
Okay, thanks, Wendy.
Sorry, Louise, if I may
provide
an example
Chadia,
also.
Please do.
Thank you. We have a project that we are working on in Central and West Africa on viral hemorrhagic fevers, and trying to get the data and engage the communities and do a lot of surveillance, lab strengthening. And all this work is done in collaboration with the environmental sector. So it's the vet and the environment working together to understand better how this viral hemorrhagic fever diseases circulate in the countries, and strengthen their capacity so they are able to diagnose and take samples together, including ecological and environmental samples. And if I may just come back to the first question about the peacetime, how we can work together. We are supporting establishing multi-sectoral coordination mechanisms at country level. Sometimes we call them One Health platforms, where all the sectors come together, sometimes under the Prime Minister office or even the President office. So they encourage the ministries to work together, and they establish work plans and shared budget. So this is what can we do in the peacetime. So when we have the pandemic, these mechanisms already exist and help us to talk to each other and sprint into response for outbreaks to control them. Thank you.
Thanks, Chadia. We have another question here, and it's really related to the costs for veterinary medicine. But is there a risk that One Health approach is going to drive up the cost of veterinary care, particularly with the explosion of pet insurance? Well, the advances in veterinary medicine are advantageous in most cases. The insurance companies seem to be cashing in on this. Well, I think the super vet program is mentioned here, Wannous being given artificial limbs, etc. So would anybody like to comment on that, on the driving up costs, the One Health approach?
I think it's really interesting, actually, because, and I think this is one of the challenges, because obviously human and veterinary medicine are funded so very differently in many settings, and veterinary medicine is primarily a private enterprise, and obviously many human health systems are nationalized to varying degrees. So in terms of public health and public veterinary medicine, I think we've already got a kind of challenging sort of dynamic there, and then how that then plays into essentially what is a private enterprise in many cases with the sort of pet industry. And I think actually it's sort of moving more towards the ethical quality of life discussions that again are mirroring what we're having around assisted dying in the human sector, rather than actually it being more in a kind of One Health setting. So I think it's kind of a really interesting kind of and thorny issue that I think touches many of the things we're talking about, but I think also raises some others as well.
Okay, thanks, Wendy. That question was actually from Amelia Lewis. We have another question from Daniel Adikpi. I'm sorry, apologies for that pronunciation, which is kind of a wide-ranging one. In your opinion, what level of preparedness and political will commitment are needed to achieve the prevention of pandemics under One Health? So I don't know whether, Chadia, is that one for you or Helen?
I think we have to achieve the highest level possible of preparedness and to sustain it, because what we see is we are reacting to outbreaks or to the pandemics, but we are not doing enough to in peacetime and preemptive prevention measures. So the level of preparedness should be the highest and maintained all the time. Before preparedness, I would like to advocate for doing more on the prevention side, either upstreams to work on climate change, the land use change, the biodiversity loss, or in the midstream prevention, where we strengthen our surveillance system to pick up unusual events so we can react to them quickly, or what they call them, the lower stream prevention, where we have, for example, in the vet services, we have the performance of vet services, the BVS, that the World Organization for Animal Health support countries to assess the level of preparedness in the vet services and identify the gaps, and then develop the roadmap to strengthen these gaps and cost them so they can do resource mobilization for this. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Chadia. We have a question here from Gabriel Lang. Thanks for some really helpful presentations to understand the bigger One Health picture. I'd be interested to hear of any good examples from the panelists of implementing a One Health approach. How do you deal with people's differing priorities and resources? So I don't know, maybe Helen, you want to pick that one up?
Yes, so I think actually one of our really good examples is how we deal with salmonella incidents in livestock, where there's a public health aspect to it as well. And we've got an excellent One Health team in the Animal Plant Health Agency who will work very closely with the local health protection teams through an incident management team. And they will also work with environmental health officers as well, in case there's on-farm issues, and the health security executive, because of potential for people being exposed through their work. And that's been working for quite a long time now. And really it's about local responses that can be done quite easily. I think if you're talking about something in a pandemic way, it's how we move that up into the broader scope. But I think locally we can do One Health and on an operational level really well in our areas, certainly.
Yeah, I know in terms of avian influenza, we've panels that go across from the veterinary to the medical side, so it does go on for specific areas. Moving on, Daisy Pin is asking, can quantitative microbial risk assessments be used as part of One Health in the future? And is anybody able to pick up that one? I'm not.
So I think it's usually part of food safety risk assessments when you're doing these, and certainly from my perspective, any risk assessment is more about a framework for answering your different questions. So if your risk question involves doing something on that topic, then yes, it can be used. And understanding how it goes from farm to fork is part of the whole One Health system. So if you've got any sort of microbial pathogen in beef meat, then you need to understand right from the start, right from the outset, the number of cattle and the hazard characterization and the exposure to people and so on. So I think it's definitely a One Health area. Yeah.
Thanks, Helen. So somebody again then is asking, in the panelists' experience, what methods work best to get researchers and policymakers, advisors connecting, working together on the ground, e.g. events like this or networking opportunities or registers of specialists accessible by government personnel and vice versa?
All of the above.
Yeah, I was going to say that too. So all of the above, if we approach this on all the fronts we can, I think that's the way to do it, so things don't fall through holes. Another one here, when will someone crack the nut on open access data sharing? We have loads of surveillance data that isn't being utilized as well as it could be. And
yeah, exactly. This is the problem that we mentioned, that we have a lot of systems, a lot of data, but
yeah,
they don't speak to each other, even if they are accessible, but how to use them, how to make them fit into your system. This is the issue that we are trying to solve with this One Health intelligence study, or with the One Health, with the Berlin Hub for Intelligence data. And
yeah,
with the support of those who hold the big data and their technical expertise to help us to resolve this issue.
so Chadia, is there still a political problem, do you think, in data sharing between particular countries, etc., that may cause problems?
Even between sectors,
Yeah.
there's also this issue that we don't know if we are authorized to share and when to share them with whom. And that's why in this negotiation about the pandemic instrument, this issue of data sharing and knowledge sharing, and even technology transfer and know-how is discussed currently in this political sphere. And there is call for equity and ethics and the principles of transparency to be the foundation of this new pandemic instrument to help us achieve more sharing of data and samples.
Thank you. So we have another question here from Pam Johnston. How much is educating society important, given they elect the political leaders who either decide to prioritize or even acknowledge the likes of climate change, etc.? So education of society on One Health probably, I think, is what we're asking, and how do we do that?
Well, I have to say that I couldn't agree more that it is important that we continue to educate everybody about these issues. I never thought I would see the day to hear R0 being talked about commonly by people who are not necessarily with a science degree. I mean, that's another thing about COVID, that scientists have really been so important in explaining that. So I think you're right. I think that actually to continue those sorts of conversations between scientists and the public is super important.
Yeah, I think COVID, there's been lots more, manifold communication of scientists with the public and explaining issues and in terms which kind of can be understood, and I think we have to continue with that around other possible pandemics.
And yeah, and absolutely 100% agree with that. And I think, but also to maintain the momentum, because I think that COVID has also not only sort of highlighted from the One Health setting, but I think also, the idea about resilient health systems that actually can respond across a broad range of different health threats is really important. And I think it's a moment that we need to catalyze that, because I suspect that, the next thing will come along, and and potentially, that kind of moment where, people do understand, very intimately, how these things all link together, and also the kind of the global, the global nature of these things, which is clearly very obvious. But I think that again is something that, while that is in the forefront of people's minds, we need to make sure we catalyse on that.
Okay, and another question here: do we need more interdisciplinary expertise and skill sets within individuals, e.g. bioscientists, coders, or environmental scientists, policymakers, in addition to specialized experts working collaboratively? Well, I mean, I think we are seeing more people who are being trained in these cross-disciplinary ways. I mean, bioinformatics is one in itself, where we're having people with biology backgrounds, doing then maybe further degrees, etc., in computing and bioanalysis. So, and I think there are many other areas where we're getting these fused disciplines. If anybody else wants to comment on that. Certainly environmental areas too. I think there's a lot more fusion with molecular scientists, for instance.
I think the more we work together, the more we understand each other and how we can leverage our values, added values that we bring from the different disciplines. So we need, for sure, bioscience, we need social scientists, we need environmental to work together to under this One Health approach. So we can understand the problem from all its angles. We should have the full picture. It's not just one side only, or one impact on humans, and we neglect the impact on the environment or on the animals. And that's why the more we work together, the better for all of us.
Yeah, and certainly across the medical and veterinary worlds, my own background kind of stems across both. So, I think actually to understand how closely related all these viruses and bacterial species are, and we can learn from an animal virus will inform us about a human one, and vice versa, and for many other infectious agents, etc. So it's very important that these things are now coming together much better than they were. I had a lot of opposition many years ago, but this is starting to break through very much so now. So there's a question from Nigel Gibbons here. How could the international community help to improve surveillance in areas where it is not a priority, or increase reporting where countries fear the consequences? So sorry, Chadia, is that one for you again?
I think we need to have this ethics lenses to the problems, and also to have some incentives for countries or communities who report the diseases. For example, if we work on regulating wildlife consumptions, for what does it mean for local communities and indigenous people? Can we provide them with alternatives so they can they don't need to eat bushmeat and so on? And same for countries. If I am reporting to you a new variants, and then I am suddenly blocked from travel or trade, next time something happened in the country, I will not report it. So we need to uphold the principle of solidarity and to support each other instead of creating more walls and more barriers to collaboration.
Right. I just wanted to one point myself kind of bring up, and this is resources. We saw during the current pandemic, while we were completely struggling to get PPE and in the labs, and we experienced this in getting kits and having to change kits, you know, to actually do the PCRs, etc. I mean, there was a major shortage of these materials being available. How do you think we can be in a much better position if we see another pandemic coming along?
I think it's always going to be difficult, because if we do expect these pandemics to come along once every 100 years, should we really be planning for that? I think we plan for what we need in this country initially, and then you still face the difficulty of, this was so unexpected, and the level of PPE that people were wearing was extraordinary, and whether it will be the same for the next virus, it's just very difficult to say. I think we're always going to be stuck in a very quick, responsive way. You can do it with, you know, we do it in the animal health sector, that we have a lot of different contracts with people who can immediately come in and help. And I don't think we have the same thing in the human health sector. It's all reliant on the NHS to do something rather than and private businesses to go and do something. So maybe they have to do something around that. I mean, we have much, I tend to think, I mean, Nigel and Jane on the call actually will know as well as anyone, but I think we are reasonably well set up in the animal health sector, but it's the public health when there's just a lot more people you have to deal with.
Yeah, one last question just come in before when this will be the last we finish. Are there ways for local and Indigenous communities to access the benefits derived from surveillance activities and research in and around their communities, which contributes to the global effort on prevention and response? So, yeah, I guess, are they going to get some kind of benefit for carrying out these surveillance activities? And I think we did touch on that earlier.
It's a big part of our FCDO ODA programs that they do abroad, is to make sure that you get the benefits of it go back to the community. And it is not just about sharing the data with everybody else in the world and making sure that the high income countries are prepared for something. It is about sharing back and having the right solutions for the right countries as well.
All right, yeah. Okay. Sorry, Wendy, did you want to say?
No, I was just wholeheartedly agreeing, and I think saying that we really do need to value, that information that is so important in contextualizing, the evidence that we, outside influence or outside researchers may generate, and sometimes come up with completely the wrong conclusion, without taking into account that information. And I think, it is a sharing of information, and, we have to recognize that communities themselves do hold a huge amount of information that is very valuable, and it's about bringing those two sets of information together, rather than it being, the researcher, the outside researchers have all the information and they share it, in a one-way system. I think it very much needs to be, that circular, information sharing and the recognition that, many of the answers are already within the community and in Indigenous knowledge.
Okay, thanks, Wendy. And with that, I'd like to draw the session to a close. And I'm very privileged this evening as a fellow of the RSB and a trustee to have chaired this wonderful session. I'm indebted to our three fantastic speakers, Wendy, Helen, and Chadia this evening. And thank you very much for all your input. I also like to thank the audience for attending and remind you again that you can find these policy lates online, and this one will go online later. Last but not least, I'd like to thank our really wonderful team at the RSB, Harriet Makara, Karen Patel and Laura Marshall, for organising and running this event. And we hope to see you at the next policy late. So thank you again, everybody.